It was just another mundane afternoon at the office, the kind where the hum of fluorescent lights and the steady tapping of keyboards became a dull symphony of monotony. No one was happy at the meeting, and after several days dealing with oblivion, I almost didn't notice the envelope. It was tucked into the stack of inter-office mail on my desk, unremarkable in every way except for the fact that it had my name scrawled on the front. In my own handwriting, my stomach did a small flip as I turned it over in my hands. There was no return address, no postage, just my name and nothing else. I tore it open, the paper inside smooth and familiar, like the kind I used for notes at work. And then my eyes fastened on the first line, and I paused, taking in the words, reading them. The message was short, but it sent a shiver down my spine. Don't go home. The date in the corner of the letter was today's. I stared at the letter for what felt like an eternity, turning it over and over in my hands. The handwriting was unmistakably mine, every loop and line exactly the way I wrote. Thanks, Boris. The chief read the letter carefully, informing the superintendent of the discovery of the colonel's suit. But I hadn't written it. It had to be a prank. Someone in the office, maybe? I glanced around, scanning the faces of my coworkers for anything suspicious, but everyone was busy, their heads buried in their monitors. Pinterest came back, and I saw that it was a message from Odia, who had emailed me prior. I crumpled the letter and shoved it into my desk drawer. But the words wouldn't leave my mind. By the time my shift ended, the letter felt like a distant memory. The office emptied out, the last stragglers grabbing their coats and saying their goodbyes. I lingered longer than usual, though I couldn't say why. Maybe it was the vague unease that had clung to me all day, or maybe it was the weight of those 3 words. Don't go home. When I finally packed up and left, it was late. The streets were quiet, the orange glow of the streetlights casting long, eerie shadows. As I approached my building, a flicker of movement in one of the windows caught my eye. The words are written to my hand. They wait for my approval. A pressing desire to be a success in business. My heart beat faster at the intensity. My window. I stopped in my tracks, my breath hitching. The light was off, but something, or someone, had moved behind the curtains. I shook my head, trying to dismiss the thought. It's just your imagination. But as I climbed the stairs, the unease grew stronger. The door to my apartment was shut, the hallway silent except for the faint hum of the building's heating system. I motioned for her to come up floor. I slid my key into the lock. It didn't turn. Frowning, I jiggled the key, but the lock resisted, as if something was jammed inside. I crouched down, squinting at the keyhole. Something was stuck in there. I reached into my pocket, pulling out my phone for light. The beam illuminated the lock, and my stomach dropped. It was a torn piece of fabric, wedged tightly into the mechanism. From my shirt. The shirt I hadn't worn yet. My hand trembled as I pulled the fabric from the lock. It was unmistakably mine. The same color, same pattern as the shirt hanging in my closet, still unworn. I slowly unbuttoned the denim shirt and stared at what I found. The door creaked open, the sound unnaturally loud in the silence of the hallway. I stepped inside, my heart pounding. The air was cold, colder than it should have been. My apartment had always been drafty, but this was different. It felt heavy, oppressive, like the atmosphere in a room where someone had just been screaming. Okay, I flicked on the light. Everything looked normal. The couch, the coffee table, the half-empty glass of water I'd left that morning. It was all exactly where I'd left it. But the unease wouldn't leave me. I locked the door behind me, testing it twice before setting my bag down. "What do you want?" And then I saw the first sign. The photo on the wall was wrong. It was a picture of me, taken last summer on a hike with friends. But the photo wasn't the same as I remembered. In the original, I'd been smiling, holding up a water bottle like a toast. But now, my face was blank, expressionless, my eyes staring directly at the camera. A chill ran down my spine as I stepped closer. Calmly, I stepped closer. The closer I got, the more wrong it looked. My reflection in the glass frame didn't match my movements. It smiled. It really hard. I backed away from the photo, my breath quickening. The air in the apartment felt heavier now, pressing against my chest. That's when I saw the envelope on the kitchen counter. It was identical to the first one, plain, unmarked, with my name scrawled on the front in my own handwriting. She read the first 2 lines, her hands fisting, and before her a fresh pair of handcuffs were placed over her left. "St. Clair," she said. I didn't remember seeing it when I came in. My fingers trembled as I opened it, the paper inside smooth and familiar. The first column described the symptoms of depression. "You shouldn't have come home." My blood ran cold. I dropped the letter, the words blurring in my vision. "Who's doing this?" I whispered to the empty room. But who's the outsider? The apartment didn't answer, but from the bedroom I heard a faint creak. I grabbed the nearest object, a heavy lamp from the end table, and crept toward the bedroom door. It was open, the darkness inside stretching endlessly, like the room had grown larger. "Hello?" I called, my voice shaking. No answer. I stepped inside, the shadows swallowing me. The air was colder here, the kind of cold that sinks into your bones. "What do you—" And then I saw it. On the bed was my shirt, the one from the closet. It was neatly folded, the torn piece missing from the fabric. Pinned to it was another note. "We're not done yet." The note felt like it was staring back at me, the words twisting in my mind. "We're not done yet." The note sort of collected between our 2 bodies, and we stayed there for a moment, staring at each other. I backed out of the bedroom, my heart pounding so loudly I could barely hear my own footsteps. The air in the apartment had shifted again, alive, charged with an energy that wasn't there before. The shadows along the walls seemed deeper now, pooling in the corners like oil. I could almost swear they were moving, creeping closer, pulsing in time with the blood rushing in my ears. And then the lights went out. I froze, the lamp slipping from my hands and thudding softly against the floor. The darkness was complete, suffocating, pressing against my skin like a physical weight. "Who's there?" I whispered, my voice trembling. There was no answer. No answer. The apartment was silent, save for the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. I fumbled for my phone, the glow of the screen barely cutting through the shadows. And then, faintly, I heard it. "Nikius la Maria Cana, Nikius la Stera." A breath. It was soft, deliberate, coming from the corner of the living room. "Show yourself!" I shouted, holding the phone up like a shield. The light illuminated the corner, and for a moment there was nothing. Just empty space. But then the shadows shifted. As a figure emerged, its shape flickering and indistinct, as though it were struggling to stay tethered to reality. It was tall, its limbs unnaturally long, its head tilted at an impossible angle. If it was a human being, it was an extraordinary sight, and it was wearing my shirt. My blood turned to ice as I stumbled back, the phone shaking in my hand. The figure stepped closer, its movements jerky and unnatural, like a marionette pulled by invisible strings. It stopped just outside the beam of light, its face obscured by the darkness. "Why didn't you listen?" it said, its voice layered and distorted, like multiple versions of me speaking at once. My legs gave out and I fell to the floor. What do you want?" I choked out, tears streaming down my face. The figure tilted its head further, the sound of its joints cracking echoing through the room. "You brought me back." I scrambled backward, the figure's shadow stretching toward me like grasping fingers. My back hit the wall, the phone slipping from my grasp and clattering to the floor. I rushed inside the bedroom, feeling the terrified shadow landing before me. I leaned against it. The figure stepped closer, its presence suffocating. "You wrote the letter," it whispered. "No, I didn't," I screamed, shaking my head violently. The figure crouched down, its head level with mine. The darkness seemed to ripple around it, swallowing the faint glow of the phone's screen. "You've always written them, you just forgot." The words clawed at my mind, a sickening sense of déjà vu washing over me. The letters, the warnings, they weren't just messages. They were mine. The figure reached out, its hand stretching impossibly long, its fingers brushing against my chest. The touch was icy, burning into my skin like frostbite. And then, in the faint glow of the phone, I saw its face. It was me, but not the me I saw in the mirror. Its features were distorted, wrong, as though it had been stretched and warped into something unrecognizable. Its hollow eyes locked onto mine, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. "It's time to remember," it said. The shadows surged forward, wrapping around me, pulling me into the darkness. And then, everything went still. The darkness swallowed me whole. I couldn't see, couldn't move. The cold was unbearable, clawing at my skin, sinking into my bones. The figure's distorted voice echoed around me, layered and fractured. "It's time." The shadows shifted, and suddenly I wasn't in my apartment anymore. I stood in a room that was eerily familiar. The walls were bare concrete, stained and cracked, the air damp and suffocating. A single dim light bulb hung overhead, casting flickering shadows that danced across the walls. On the floor in front of me was a desk, and on the desk were dozens of envelopes, all identical to the ones I'd received. Dirt evidence, free stuff of clues and crime solve. I stepped closer, my legs trembling, my breath hitching as I picked up the nearest letter. The handwriting on the front was mine. The envelope trembled in my hands as I tore it open. The contents were too thick to see. The drink rule. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 3 words scrawled across it. "It's your fault." The room around me shifted, the walls groaning as if they were alive. The desk was gone now, replaced by a mirror standing in the center of the room. I stepped closer, my reflection staring back at me. But as I moved, it didn't. My reflection stayed perfectly still, its eyes locked onto mine. Its expression twisted into a grin, cruel and mocking. "You wrote them," it whispered, its voice coming from everywhere and nowhere. "I didn't," I shouted, backing away. "You did," it said, stepping out of the mirror. Its movements were slow, deliberate, the shadows clinging to it like smoke. "Why?" I choked out, tears streaming down my face. "Why are you doing this?" It tilted its head, the grin widening. I decided it was time to try another. "Because you forgot." The room dissolved, and I was back in my apartment. Something comic and wild roared through me, and I cracked my knuckles. The air was heavy, the faint scent of smoke and decay clinging to the walls. The figure stood in front of me now, its distorted features clearer than ever. The letters were everywhere, pinned to the walls, scattered across the floor, covering every surface. The letters were from the sun and the planet. I picked one up, my hands trembling as I read the words inside. "Don't go home." The figure stepped closer, its presence overwhelming. Pip started as if caught. "You didn't listen," it hissed. The shadows surged forward, pulling me into the darkness. When my coworkers arrived the next morning, they found my desk empty. The only sign I'd ever been there was an envelope sitting neatly on the keyboard. Inside was a single note, written in my handwriting. "Don't come looking." Story 2, The Wall That Breathes. The apartment was a relic from another time. The walls were cracked, the plumbing groaned like an old man waking up, and the floors creaked with every step. Still, there was potential. A diamond in the rough, I'd told myself when I signed the lease. With a little work, it could feel like home. Or so I thought. The trouble started with the wallpaper. It was hideous. Faded floral patterns that looked like they hadn't been touched since the 1970s. Most of it peeled easily, giving way to cracked plaster and the occasional nest of spiders. But in one room, the wallpaper wouldn't budge. It clung to the wall stubbornly, refusing to give even under the sharpest blade. What was worse, it was oddly swollen, the surface bulging in unnatural ways, like something was trapped beneath it. But at first I thought it was just moisture damage. The building was old after all, and water had a way of sneaking into places it didn't belong. But as I ran my hand over the bulge, it felt different. The wallpaper shifted slightly under my touch, like it was moving. Breathing. Couldn't stop thinking about it. I'd planned to leave the room for later. It wasn't a priority, and I didn't have the energy to deal with it right away. But every time I passed the doorway, the sight of that swollen wallpaper gnawed at me. By the third day, I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed a utility knife, knelt in front of the wall, and made the first cut. The paper peeled back easily, exposing the surface beneath. But instead of the cracked plaster I was expecting, I found smooth, unmarked concrete. And then I heard it, a faint whisper, so soft I almost thought I'd imagined it. I leaned closer, pressing my ear to the wall. The sound was muffled but unmistakable. A voice. "Help." I stumbled back, my heart pounding. What the hell? The whisper came again, faint but insistent. "Let me out." I dropped the knife and stumbled out of the room, slamming the door behind me. My mind raced, searching for a logical explanation. Maybe it was a pipe, or the wind moving through the old building. But deep down I knew better. The voice wasn't random. It wasn't noise. It was speaking to me. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard it again. The faint whisper from the wall, replaying in my mind like a broken record. Worse, I thought. Let me out. I told myself it wasn't real. It couldn't be. Old buildings make strange noises. Maybe I'd imagined the voice, conjured it out of my own unease. But no matter how much I tried to convince myself, the memory of that moment lingered, gnawing at the edges of my mind. When morning finally came, I dragged myself out of bed, exhausted but determined to finish what I'd started. Whatever was behind that wallpaper, I needed to know. But when I stepped into the room, I froze. The corridor was wide, and they were both in uniform. If one of them was smiling, the other was facing the camera. The wall was no longer bare. It was covered in wallpaper. Not just any wallpaper. The same wallpaper I'd cut away the night before. My stomach churned as I stepped closer, my fingers brushing against the surface. It was seamless, as though no blade had ever touched it. The floral pattern stretched perfectly across the wall, undisturbed by the cut I knew I'd made. Honey, this wasn't possible. I backed away, my chest tightening as the air in the room seemed to grow heavier. My eyes darted to the utility knife, still lying on the floor where I'd dropped it. I picked it up with trembling hands, my grip tightening as I approached the wall. And then the whisper came again. "Don't." I froze, the knife poised midair. The voice was louder now, clearer, as if whoever or whatever was speaking was right behind the wallpaper. "Huh. Huh," it said, gripping the floor. "Please, don't." The room felt colder, the air pressing against my skin like icy fingers. My heart raced as I stared at the bulging surface, my hand trembling. Exercises 1 through 4 had been workspace. My nervousness had faded to a sense of pride. I had improved more than a few times since breaking my back. "Let me out." The word sent a jolt of fear through me, and I stumbled back, dropping the knife again. The whisper grew louder, the words overlapping now, urgent and pleading. "Let me out, post. Let me out." I bolted from the room, slamming the door behind me. By the time I'd gathered the courage to go back, hours had passed. The light outside had faded, the apartment cloaked in the shadows of early evening. I stood in front of the door, my hand on the knob, my breath shaky. "It's just a wall," I told myself. "Just a stupid wall." Judah opened the door. "Now, keep it." The wallpaper was still there, the floral pattern stretching across the room like nothing had ever happened. But now, something was different. The bulge was gone. Instead, the surface was covered in long, jagged scratches. They crisscrossed the wallpaper like claw marks, cutting deep into the wall beneath. My chest tightened as I stepped closer, the air thick with an oppressive weight. And then I saw the words. They were faint, etched into the wall beneath the scratches. You didn't listen. The room felt alive, the shadows shifting and stretching like they were watching me. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over the knife on the floor. And then the whispers returned. But this time, they weren't coming from the wall. They were coming from behind me. The whispers behind me were faint at first, soft and disjointed, like fragments of words carried on a breeze. I turned slowly, every nerve in my body screaming to run. The room behind me was empty. But the whispers didn't stop. They grew louder, overlapping, twisting together into something sharp and unnatural. The air grew colder, heavy with the metallic tang of damp concrete. I backed away, my gaze darting between the room and the wallpaper. The scratches were deeper now, the words etched into the wall more defined. "Miss Rooms fill with something dark," Michael said. "You didn't listen." And then, as if answering my thoughts, the voice spoke again, louder this time. She said, moved to take my hand in hers. Her fingers curled into the belt tightening the fabric of her jacket. I leaned in. Her hand curled from the cool wetness of her cheek. The sound wasn't coming from the wall anymore. It surrounded me, pressing against my ears, my chest, my mind. The whispers grew into a cacophony of voices, all speaking at once, their tones fractured and wrong. "Go away," I thought to myself. "Go away. Go away." I grabbed the knife from the floor, my grip slick with sweat. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice shaking. "What do you want?" Zert. The voices fell silent. For a moment, the room was deathly quiet. My breath came in short, ragged gasps as I clutched the knife, waiting. And then the wall moved. It wasn't a subtle shift. The wallpaper rippled violently, the floral pattern twisting and writhing as though the wall itself was alive. And then it exhales. A rush of cold air burst from the wall, carrying with it the faint scent of mildew and rot. "Let me out," the voice said again, deep and guttural now, no longer pleading. My body moved on its own, the knife slicing into the wallpaper. The fabric tore easily, exposing more of the concrete beneath. But the concrete wasn't solid anymore. The wall had changed, its surface now soft and pulsing, like flesh stretched too thin. My stomach churned as I stepped back, the torn wallpaper dangling limply like shed skin. The whisper came again, sharp and commanding. Cut deeper. The words pulled at me, their weight unbearable. I raised the knife again, my hand trembling as I sliced deeper into the wall. Exercise after deeply stressing times can break through the halts of biological processes. It ground. The sound wasn't human. It was low and guttural, vibrating through the room like the growl of something immense. The wall shuddered violently, cracks spreading outward from the tear. Then I saw it. The hand pushed through the tear, pale and skeletal, its fingers impossibly long. It grasped at the edge of the torn wallpaper, pulling it back to reveal more of the pulsing, flesh-like surface beneath. Another hand followed, then a face. It wasn't a face. Not really. It was a twisted, hollow void where features should have been, its edges rippling like smoke. "You opened it," the voice said, now clear and unmistakably angry. The thing crawled out, its body jerking and shifting unnaturally. It wasn't human. It was a shadow, a memory, a void given form. It didn't resist magic. It was a specter, filling the betrayal's home. I stumbled back, my legs weak, my chest tight with panic. "You told me to," I choked out, tears streaming down my face. The figure tilted its head, its empty gaze fixed on me. "You didn't listen." The room around me dissolved into chaos. The walls groaned and cracked, the floor buckling beneath my feet. Shadows surged forward, wrapping around my legs, pulling me closer to the figure. "Us." "Prepare for effective decompression," Dr. Ridge said. I screamed, thrashing against the invisible grip, but it was no use. The last thing I saw was the figure's void-like face leaning closer, its twisted form consuming my vision. "Now you'll stay," it whispered. And then everything went dark. When the landlord arrived the next morning, the apartment was empty. The room where I'd worked on the wallpaper was sealed, the door gone as though it had never existed. But faintly beneath the floral wallpaper that now covered every surface, you could hear it, breathing.